Protests in Colombia over a proposed tax plan and accusations of police brutality have killed more than 36 people in the past 2 weeks. The uprising started late last month when Colombian President Duque proposed a tax hike on the middle class. The government said the money would have been used to ease the strain of the pandemic, but critics say the plan would have caused more than 3 million Colombians to fall back into poverty. The government pulled the plan 4 days after protests began, but that has done little to stop the unrest in the country. Many are also criticizing the government's violent response to protesters. Joining me now is Kevin Whitaker. He is the former U.S. ambassador to Colombia who served in both the Obama and Trump administrations. Ambassador, thank you for being here. President Duque canceled the tax measure just a few days after pitching it. But please explain that why, for our viewers, these protests are still happening.
Sure, Lana. Thanks very much for this opportunity. I think there's a couple of different things that are going on here. First, as you mentioned, we have the tax increase that was proposed, and this was intended to get government accounts more into balance. Colombia experienced a 7% decline in GDP in 2020. And that has gravely affected government revenues, which are used for a variety of purposes, obviously. But in addition to that, you have the great dislocation caused by the pandemic. Colombia has been hurt disproportionately or worse than some of its neighbors in the region. And so you have an accumulation of anger and dissent that are related to both elements, which manifested themselves in these demonstrations.
And this is also, as you mentioned, the pandemic been further amplified by growing rates of coronavirus infections in the country. And then adding on top of that, there are reports of the Colombian police confronting peaceful protesters with weapons and armored vehicles. Human Rights Watch posted a video that appears to show police shooting some type of projectile at protesters. Why is the government launching such a harsh response?
Yes. So in this as well, there are a couple of things going on. First, the legitimate protest, as I mentioned, for the reasons I mentioned. But there have been occasions, especially in the city of Cali, where more violent elements are taking advantage of the general unrest to engage in some very serious acts of violence, including direct armed confrontation with the police, and also including blocking roads so that many of the cities are experiencing shortages of gas and food and things like this. Now, obviously, the government has a responsibility to maintain order, and it has a responsibility to do that in a way which is consistent with the human rights and the right to protest of those people who are involved. So I think what you're seeing there is perhaps some evidence of an incident where those standards weren't upheld. In that event, and this is what President Duque has called for and is implementing, in that event, what is required is an investigation. And the Colombian authorities have instigated about 50 investigations against members of the security forces for alleged acts of undue violence or disproportionate violence in the context of these demonstrations, and there have been a number of arrests as well.
The underlying economic and societal problems in Colombia are deep. Many of them are profound, and this tax proposal was, in some ways, according to the Duque administration, an attempt to rectify it, but obviously went in entirely the wrong direction from what the populace there saw as the necessary leadership. So what does the government need to do now to address these problems?
Lana, I think that's right. I mean, there was a very strong reaction to this, in part because the tax hike was designed as an increase to the value-added tax. So this is not a progressive tax in which the rich pay more, but rather something that was spread all throughout society. And that's part of the reason that you got that reaction. What's called for now is dialogue. And President Duque has already begun dialogue with 3 separate political groupings outside of the institutional democratic process, and also with the National Committee of the Strike, the National Strike Committee, which has a leadership role in organizing these demonstrations, these strikes, which are occurring throughout the country. This is the way forward for Colombia and for the Duque administration to engage in direct dialogue with their counterparts in an effort to see what their requirements are and seek a solution that will bring about peace on the streets and an opportunity to move forward with respect to the many challenges that Colombia otherwise faces, including responding to the pandemic and getting the economy moving again.
Before I let you go, Ambassador, I want to talk a little bit about the international response. Do you think that this, what is certainly a crisis situation in Colombia, has received enough international attention? And is the U.S. or any other foreign actors doing anything to try and bring about a resolution?
I don't know that any foreign actors are involved in the resolution component of this. This is something that Colombians are seeking to address themselves as is appropriate. Many nations have expressed concern about the violence that has occurred and have called upon the Colombian state to be sure that the security forces act in a way which is consistent with international human rights law, and when alleged violations occur, to address those through investigations. And so that's something the United States has said, and I know a number of other nations have as well. Colombia is going through a very difficult moment in a country which has sort of had a history of difficult moments. The key now is for all of the sectors of society to be able to speak to one another. And that's why, in my view at least, it's so positive that President Duque has initiated this dialogue process that I referred to.
Ambassador Kevin Whitaker, thank you.
Thanks very much, Lana.